Hello there.
The defense. Defense. Don't jump. You said smug. What's your button layout? Default.
Controller questions pop up in most pro players' streams. They usually seem disinterested, and there are a few reasons. These questions can infer that the controller defines the player, but most importantly for us casual gamers is that it doesn't really matter at our level. I feel like controller questions usually want the answer to which is the best controller, and I don't think this is the right question to be asking.
Is controller better?
Little yeet fuck. You should try it.
I can't tell.
Yeah, Miz, so the way it works is just preference. Like, this is what I use, right? There's pad, there's hitbox, which is kind of like, this is kind of like a hitbox, and there's fight stick. Fight stick is more old school. Fight stick is like the boomer. Like, the new generation fighting game players use pad and hitbox.
I wanted to illustrate why it comes down to preference, so I've recorded relevant examples with pad, button controller, and arcade stick to help explain the subtle differences. Ultimately, I want to illustrate that they all work completely fine. I won't be covering how these work in real matches today, I'm just focusing on inputs. I have another video about that in the works, so watch this space. I'll link below amazing resources to Maximillian Dood, Jmcrofts, Sajam, Vesper and Lordknight, where they ask, do you need an arcade controller to play fighting games? And like and sub to them while you're there, those guys are legends. This video is visual and supplementary to theirs to help explain concepts that can be difficult to explain with words. Is one controller better than the other? It doesn't seem that way. Most people will have a preference. Can a controller be easier for certain characters? Maybe, but it's debatable. Can a controller layout be better for certain games? Maybe, but it's debatable. Does one controller have a better design and last longer than the others? Well, you get the idea. When looking at the positives and negatives, there seems to be a strange natural balance. What you want out of a controller in fighting games will depend on your level, the range of games you want to play, what you can afford, and the layout you like. All of these preferences are going to be different for everyone. So hopefully this video can help you decide what preferences are most important to you. Let's begin. Looking at the internals of these controllers gives us a better idea of how they work. You use the lever to activate the 4 motion buttons up, down, left and right. You guide the lever through the switches in a way that initiates the motions correctly. Since it's a lever, your inputs feel like they are connected. This might be more tangible for people to understand. Lever is restricted by a gated bracket, which allows you to feel little reference points in each of the 4 corners. For example, when you hold down back, it's clear that not only on the screen, but also by feeling that you're crouch blocking. This is a Korean lever, or a crown lever, and the switches are slightly different. They have more resistance to them, which leads to the lever feeling very springy. This controller is particularly preferred by Tekken players. You have to be precise with your inputs when forward or backdashing with Brian. If you don't do the input correctly, it looks like this. So I'm not a Tekken player and this was my first time trying this, so please be gentle in the comments. These are what the inputs should look like. The internals of the crown lever make this input feel a little easier. Because the metal component that triggers the switch is bendy, it feels like all you need to do to return to neutral is to release the lever. It sort of pops back into place, making it feel like you need to do one less input. This is one of the reasons why some Tekken players prefer this lever over a SilverWah lever. It's definitely possible to use SilverWah stick to do this. It's really not that much harder. So if you're confused by different sticks or feel like you want to switch, don't worry too much. Whatever you have will be completely fine, and it might not benefit you to spend money on a new one. When I do play Tekken, I use Kazuya, so I'm more familiar with him. His wave dash is a bit easier to do than Brian's, so these levers both feel about the same for me. This combo is insanely difficult, and and I wasn't able to do it on every controller I used, so I thought it's a good example of why some people might prefer to use different controllers in different fighting games. It's unlikely you'll be able to land this in a real match, but being able to do it only a handful of times is possible if you practice it. Serious Kazuya players might choose a controller that lets them do this, as it'll be so hype if they can land it in a real match sometimes.
Oh shit!
Using an arcade stick for characters like Zangief won't give you any advantages for 360 and 720 motions in Street Fighter V. The game has quite lenient inputs compared to older games, and you can't do standing 720s, so if you use an arcade stick or not for Zangief, it's going to come down to satisfaction or preference. And I've got to say, doing 360s and 720s on a stick feels pretty damn satisfying. Arcade stick won't give you any advantages for charged characters in Street Fighter V. I personally feel no hand pain when using a stick for charged characters, and I'll cover that more later. Being able to hit diagonals clearly feels nice for Guile, as it helps when doing his flash kick to super. Guile can do standing light kick into boom or flash kick. It's quite strong, but it's also hard to do. You have to be charging down, then pass through neutral position and hit light kick while standing, and then very quickly hit up plus kick. On stick it feels slightly harder to pass through the neutral position precisely before hitting up accidentally. But there's no reason with practice you can't feel comfortable performing this motion on stick. It might just take slightly more effort. Instant Yoga Gale is similar to SPD, but you almost always want to hit up plus forward and punch so that he'll move forwards. This makes it a bit more precise than SPD, and it's a necessary tool to use this character effectively. For me this motion felt easiest on stick, and I could see why some people would prefer to use this controller for this character. But for me, I hate Sim, so there's nothing that would want me to use any controller for this guy anyway. I had CVS1 back in the day on Dreamcast when I was a teenager, and I could never do this move. It's a difficult input to do in neutral, and I can't think of any time I've seen this in a CVS2 tournament. Maybe it's a good anti-air or something, but I don't really know. It felt pretty good on stick, but I didn't notice much difference between the controllers for this one. So this is a good example where a tricky input doesn't really have much difference between different controllers. This feels a lot like Kazuya's wave dash done quickly. If you misinput any of the DP motions while juggling, it will drop. This felt great on stick, but it's harder on player 1 side. But that's a me thing, not the controller. This combo is super hard, much respect to CVS2 players who nail this in tournament. You can do standing 720s in third strike, but it's really hard. It took me about an hour to do this for the first time. There's a real trick to it, and once you know, you know. In that respect I'd say it's knowledge over the controller that helps with this input. Doing it on stick feels great, but your table might fall over from tuning the butter so hard, and you'll definitely annoy your roommates. Here's the internals of a pad controller. These metal conductors are what trigger up, down, left and right. The rubber pad sits on these to provide texture. Most D-pads have this little pivot. It rests on the board so you can swoop over the motion similar to how you would with an arcade stick. So the main benefit of the D-pad is also kind of its weakness. There's a short distance between motions and it's easy to get them instantly, but that distance can also make it easier to hit the motions you don't want. Again, this is preference. Some will love it and some might hate it. This is a split D-pad. I just found out it's a thing and I already had the majority of this video fleshed out, so I haven't had enough time with it yet to talk about it too much, but I still wanted to show it. In theory, this could be similar to how all button layout works, by separating the inputs and eliminating the issue I mentioned earlier with the connected D-pad. I might make another video on this, so let me know in the comments below if you're interested in seeing that. Korean backdash felt quite natural on D-pad for me. You can see that it's a really small motion, so I could understand how this might be hard to achieve in real matches. I'm sure with practice you could make this comfortable and reliable to do. I was able to hit this about the same time it took me to do it on stick. One thing I'll say about pad that's nice for me personally with Tekken is I don't notice a considerable difference on player 1 and player 2 side. On stick, I can't do this on player 1 side. I personally think player 2 side for Mishima characters feels way more comfortable on stick, which for me adds to my mental stack in real matches. But again, this is a me thing, not the controller. I was actually a little surprised, but I was able to hit this most accurately with the D-pad. I think it's because the motions are so close and it allows you to do the DPs very quickly. For me, this was the most surprising thing in the whole series of trials. I was able to do Tachigigas on the D-pad about 5 times, whereas it took me an hour to learn to do it once on the stick. Now it's questionable because the time I invested learning it on the stick might have applied and helped me to do this better on the pad, but to me, even doing it now feels so much easier on pad than it does on stick. So here's my thing with the D-pad for charge characters. When I was trying to use Guile in real matches, I had to shake the cramp out of my thumb after every round. It's not a big deal, but personally I can't concentrate as well when my hand is cramping up. Also, I noticed this was kind of only a Guile thing. I didn't get the same problem with Bison, as he doesn't need to charge as much as Guile. But there is a workaround for this, which NuckleDoo found years ago. If you're using a PlayStation or analog controller, you can use the analog stick for movement, and this seems to solve the thumb cramp issue. It feels great for charge characters. The two options for movement feel very different. It's like 2 controllers in one, and I think that's super cool. It has a circular gate, which means there aren't reference points for where you are, and I'm sure it's not going to be for everyone. For whatever reason, it feels amazing for parries in Third Strike. Similar to that, it feels amazing for 360s and 720s, as you can just ride that circular gate all the way around. We don't need to look inside all button controllers to understand how they work. The inputs are all laid out for us in the open. The motions feel like they are separated. I mentioned earlier for arcade stick and pad that inputs feeling connected can be a strength and a weakness, and the same applies here for motions feeling separated. The weakness is that it requires more dexterity in each of your fingers, which translates to a learning curve if you're used to another controller. The strength is that your inputs are going to feel clearly defined, and it will eventually feel less likely to hit a direction that you don't want. There are 2 main layouts for all button controllers. WASD layout was popularised by the Mixbox controller. I find myself swapping my middle finger between up and down. This feels intuitive at first, but it leads to some issues you might not consider, and I'll explain this shortly. This layout was originated by the official hitbox controller. I remember seeing this for the first time years ago and thinking, what? And why? The reason is that you don't need to swap your fingers, as I mentioned earlier for the WASD layout. It also allows you to use your right thumb and index simultaneously with an attack button. It feels very easy since it's on the same hand. This has various applications that are very useful in fighting games, and I'll explain why shortly. I have to be honest, WASD feels very bad for Zangief. It's very awkward to get 360 and 720 motions. I just feel like I'm stumbling between my fingers because I'm constantly trying to switch the middle finger between up and down. It just doesn't feel right, unfortunately. I could not for the life of me get a 720 on the Mixbox layout. It's the same issue again for Guile. It feels awkward hitting up from down because you have to switch your fingers around. It's very difficult to do his flash kick into super. It's possible, but I don't think it's viable or necessary to struggle this much, and in my opinion, it defeats the purpose of using all buttons. This is the one case in which I believe that there is a better controller, and that's if we are only talking about all button layouts. But in saying that, if you never intend to use a charge character or an SPD character, then it's a great controller. Also, some people just can't get their head around the hitbox layout, so I can completely understand why WASD layout exists. The thing about it is you never know which kind of character you're going to like before they come out in new games, or if you discover an old game that you haven't tried before. I personally want to be able to do all motions comfortably on my controller, so I can't recommend this controller for that reason. Also, to mod your current controller to this layout, or to buy a new one can be very expensive, so be aware of all this before you take the plunge. When I first saw the hitbox layout, I thought to myself, how the hell do you do an SPD? If you use the method I mentioned earlier of using your right hand to do up plus punch, it's actually kind of easy. You have more time than you'd think to hit up plus punch. After doing the full half circle, you're able to get a lot of control and accuracy with it in Street Fighter V. However, doing 720s does feel quite tricky and you kinda had to mash it. It feels quite tricky to do this consistently with Sim. I think with practice it might be possible to hit this as reliably as the other controllers, but it's going to take some training. So people think that Guile is OP on all buttons, and I want to explain why. I don't necessarily think he's OP, but I do think some things are easier for him. For example, this loop combo requires specific charge times and lots of micro walks. It feels more consistent to get every time on all buttons. I'll briefly explain SOCD without getting too technical. While holding back, if you press forward, you get neutral position. This means you can't hold back and leave your finger on back, then hit forward and punch to get boom. This would be broken, it would be too strong I think. So it means you actually have to remove your finger from back and hit forward and punch to get booms. But you can hold down and still get ups, which means super easy flash kicks. And probably the easiest, maybe strongest anti-air in the game with this controller. It is so easy. As I mentioned with the other controllers, there's some difficulty in passing through neutral and then hitting up and kick for flash kick or forward and punch for boom. With the hitbox layout, this feels a lot more consistent. Feels like you're able to do it instantly because your fingers are already exactly where they need to be without the other inputs being in the way. The other controllers require you to pass through those inputs very closely, and it's got to be done quickly. You see Daigo using light kick boom quite often, as it's somewhat unexpected to see Guile do this and can catch people off guard, as well as being a strong option on wake up offense and defense. This is quite a good example of where it might not necessarily matter at our level. In our ranked matches or online tournaments, being able to do light kick into boom on command isn't going to win us a game. To be honest, we probably won't even understand its utility completely. But for Daigo at high level, it can be a strong option that he wants to use to make his opponent think, oh shit, he's got those, he's ready for anything, or oh no, now I have to worry about that option, and I haven't labbed that at all. So for Daigo to be able to do these light kick confirms is going to be a very strong option, as his opponent might not necessarily be looking out for it, and he's going to feel very confident that he's going to be able to hit it. So he'll be more likely or more inclined to try this, even in tournament settings. Because you have to be so precise with the Korean backdash, all buttons feels like a great controller to achieve this precision. It ends up being like a sort of a rhythm. It feels like you put your two fingers down and then you just release and sort of tap to the rhythm. In saying that, it does feel quite different, so if you're used to another controller, it might take a while to learn how to do this. And again, as I said with the D-pad before, it feels like there's no difference on player 1 or player 2 side, just for me personally. I think that's definitely something to consider in Tekken, where the side you play on can influence a match. The way the SOCD system works lets you do some wild wave dashing with Kazuya. There's quite a long history of keyboard warriors in Tekken, and this is definitely one of its clear strengths, and it transfers nicely to all button controllers. In saying that, I could not for the life of me perform down forward 2 into perfect electric. Seriously, I tried this for an hour and honestly, I had to give up. Sorry guys. I'm sure it's possible, I just could not do it. This combo does honestly feel a little bit easier on the other controllers because I think this game was designed for stick, but you can totally do this on all buttons. Again, here's the pretzel motion on the all buttons controller. Not much harder or any more difficult than the other controllers. Some people might prefer it, might feel easier on all buttons. But I just again wanted to show that if you want to commit to all buttons, you can really use this controller for every game if you want to. To further show this concept, it's even possible to do 720 motions on all buttons in third strike. Parries feel incredibly easy on all buttons. I'd say it's quite clearly the easiest controller to parry with. So it definitely is possible to Tachigigas on all buttons, but I had to go through another hour grinding session to get it for the first time, and I didn't have to do that with pad. So that's a thing, I guess. It's hard to explain because it feels like you're being more precise with the inputs on all buttons. It's just hard to get them as quickly as you need for Tachigigas. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that if you want to commit to all buttons and make it your only controller, it really is possible to do any input you want. You might just have to grind for it more. I think this also shows that if you can do this crazy hard input with this controller, it's going to be more than capable of simple inputs that you'll use more in real matches. I want to talk about inputs in modern fighting games and why simplifying them can be good for us, and how it might affect what controller you choose. Daigo Moment 37 is not only amazing because he parried the whole damn thing, but also the combo he did after was way harder than the ones we're used to now. You need to land your jumping heavy kick quite deep so that you can link into crouching medium kick. As soon as you've hit the crouching medium kick, you need to input a shoryuken with a medium punch and then immediately do a quarter circle forward kick so that it will initiate a super. You have to do all of that faster than I can finish the sentence. The developers of Street Fighter V made timing between normals link longer, but more importantly, they introduced a buffer system that allows you to get DPs easier. You're able to perform DPs by holding down forward and then inputting another quarter circle forward. It's so much easier. When we look at them side by side, you can see that in Street Fighter V, your hands have to work a lot less than in third strike. This might not look that much harder, but trust me, it really is. It's so much harder to do this combo in third strike. From the Street Fighter V developers making this simple change, it really opens up the game to all players on all controllers, and that's better for everyone. Good for them because they can sell more copies of the game, good for us because we get more players, and you don't need an expensive arcade controller to do combos. My main reason for making this video is that I saw some videos that are a bit biased towards certain controllers, and I think it might be confusing for some, or lead them to an investment that might not benefit them. As you can see from inputs across a variety of old and new games, and from modern inputs getting easier, controllers can get super specific for how they are arguably better or worse. I think all of these things can be mitigated by practice, which you aren't going to be able to avoid regardless, so you really can't make a bad decision in whatever you choose.
Job was having second thoughts about the relationship.
I've made a huge mistake.
But when Job recommitted to her,
I've made a huge mistake.
Try and find what preferences are important to you. These preferences will be what games you play, layout, size, cost, and most importantly in my opinion, enjoyment factor, as that is the main thing that differs between them, is how they feel. Unfortunately, I can't define this. Everyone is going to enjoy them differently. Here are my preferences and recommendations for controllers. For a normal pad, I'd recommend a DS4 or a DS5 controller. For the 6-button layout, I like the Fighting Commander 4. For all button controllers, if you prefer a big controller, I'd say go for the Hitbox Official. If you want something compact, go for the Snackbox Micro. These are going to be a bit tricky to get, so if you want to try them, I'd suggest trying a mechanical keyboard. It's not going to be exactly the same, but you'll get the idea before you commit to the price. I don't recommend Mixbox layout personally, but if you really must, the Cardi mod is good if you already have an arcade stick. And they have an add-on that will let it become like the Hitbox layout later if you want to try both options. The official Mixbox is a huge rip-off in my opinion. There's no way to mod this case's layout if you don't like it. For arcade sticks, I'd recommend the Quamba Obsidian, the Itoki Omni, or the Quamba Drone. These are the new sticks that I'd recommend. I wouldn't personally recommend anything cheaper, as you'll most likely want to upgrade eventually, which will end up costing you more anyway. If you really want a cheap option, I'd suggest getting a second-hand Mad Cat something, as they are relatively easy to come by and they have great enclosures. They also already have SilverWah parts in them. You'll be able to use them on PC, and if you then really like stick, you can future-proof them with parts and PCBs in the future. Both of the sticks in this video I bought for $50 New Zealand. In conclusion, try not to let a good player's choice completely influence yours. You are not them. The controller doesn't define a player. I've gone through all this so you don't have to, and I hope at least something in here has been helpful for you. Pick what feels fun or comfortable for you. And if you still can't decide, then be a Giga Chad like me and just have fun with them all. See you!